Cleared for takeoff for Tahiti, runway 12.
One of the most rugged planes ever built.
Pilots all called it the Jeep in the sky.
Crashes into the sea near Tahiti.
A plane doesn't just crash for no reason.
Air traffic controllers have no idea what happened.
We're a small airport here. We're not equipped with radar.
It looked like it was going to be a very difficult investigation.
Was it a medical emergency?
The pilot might have had a physical breakdown.
An act of sabotage? No! Or something even more alarming, a hidden threat that lurks at commercial airports around the world. Pilot Michel Santoren cruises low over the islands of French Polynesia.
Air Maria requesting clearance for approach, runway 12.
It's one of up to 40 flights a day between the islands of Moorea and Tahiti.
Air Maria, you were clear for final, runway 12.
It's a route Eric Lamar knows well.
Moorea is an island that's really close to Tahiti. The distance between them isn't even 20 kilometers. There's just the channel to cross.
Tahiti and Moorea are two of more than 100 islands that make up French Polynesia, halfway between Australia and South America. Pristine beaches and lush mountain peaks attract thousands of tourists a year. Air Moorea specializes in the short flights that provide a vital link between the islands.
Air Moorea and its planes were really part of the daily landscape for the Polynesians. People working in Tahiti and living in Moorea. And for the tourists, it really was the quickest and most efficient link.
Me again.
Michel Santoren joined Air Moorea just 3 months ago.
I'll take the passenger list and load sheet if it's ready.
After a career in the military, he's beginning a new life in paradise.
He'd taken care of everything to welcome his family. His wife was joining him soon.
Ah, another full one. Just the way we like it.
Santoren flies these short hops on his own, with no co-pilot or cabin crew to help out.
Okay, time to fly. No time to waste in paradise.
Every 30 minutes, he needs to be ready for another takeoff.
The captain would quickly check the plane to see if there was anything alarming, a deflated tire, anything that might call their attention.
The Twin Otter turboprop is a rugged 19-passenger aircraft built in Canada.
In fact, we pilots all called it the Jeep in the sky.
Nice shirt.
We would greet the passengers quickly and reboard.
Yeah, you see.
It was very, very short, let's say.
How you doing? Just put the luggage in the seat in front of you. Beautiful day to fly.
After less than 15 minutes on the ground, Santoren is ready to go again.
Tower, we're ready to taxi.
Air Maria, you are cleared for takeoff, runway 12.
Cleared for takeoff for Tahiti, runway 12.
The Twin Otter has little automation. Santoren flies this plane by hand.
The majority of modern commercial planes are loaded with help for the pilots. Electronics, screens. But on this type of plane, you have the pleasure of handling the plane and fully controlling it.
At this island airport, the ocean is just off the edge of the 1,200-meter runway.
When we fly over there, it's magical. Blue lagoons, magnificent islands, the greenery, the mix of colors. It's certainly paradise.
Vacationers get to watch the regular takeoffs and landings. The flight is one of the shortest on Earth, just 7 minutes from takeoff to touchdown.
Huh? Damn it.
But on Flight 1121, something is wrong. The Twin Otter is losing altitude fast. It falls into a steep dive. Less than 2 minutes after takeoff, Flight 1121 crashes into the Pacific.
Oh my God!
The tower is told what people have seen.
Is it floating or has it gone under?
Local fishermen rush to help, but they find no survivors, only bodies. All 20 people on the flight are dead.
On a fait ce qu'on a pu, mais en fait, il n'y avait pas de survivants, quoi. Il y avait personne. Personne de vivant.
I will always remember. It was terrible because we were still hoping that despite what happened, people would come out alive, or at least a couple.
The disaster touches nearly everyone in the tiny island community.
In Polynesia, everyone knows each other. Everyone is someone's cousin or knows their family. So people were hit very hard by this accident.
The Air Maria fleet is grounded when pilots refuse to fly the Twin Otter until they know what caused the crash.
A plane doesn't just crash for no reason. It was either due to pilot error or a mechanical problem. So before continuing to fly, we asked that the whole fleet be checked out.
Bonjour.
Because Maria is a French territory, a team from France's Accident Investigation Bureau, the BEA, is sent from Paris. It's their job to figure out what went wrong.
Tell me there's more.
Alain Bouillard leads the investigation.
Le Twin Otter est un avion extrêmement robuste.
The Twin Otter was an extremely robust plane. It was used in all the difficult places where other planes can't normally take off and land.
C'était quelque chose qui nous a interpellés.
That made us wonder, what could have happened to this plane that would have made it hit the water?
La surface de la mer.
Investigators usually rely on clues from the wreckage.
This tells us nothing.
But most of this plane is at the bottom of the ocean. Bouillard will have little to go on unless he can get vital pieces back on dry land.
We are going to need a lot more wreckage than this.
There's another reason to find the plane. Unlike large airliners, Twin Otters are not required to carry cockpit voice recorders. But Air Maria installed one anyway. It could hold the answers investigators are looking for.
We were hoping to get, in addition to the voice in the cockpit voice recorder, any kind of alarms that would sound.
But recovering the CVR from the deep waters off the coast of Moorea will be a huge challenge.
Way too deep to send on divers.
The sea depth of this area was around 700 meters, so obviously you cannot send any diver. You need to send a remote control operated submarine.
Investigators arrange for a ship equipped with a remote-controlled submersible to assist in the recovery, the Ile de Ré. There's just one catch. It's more than 4,000 kilometers away off the island of New Caledonia. It could take weeks for the ship to get to Moorea. Flight 1121 CVR is equipped with a locator beacon, or pinger, but the battery that powers it will only last 30 days.
We'll try to send that recovery ship as soon as possible and within the 30 days of the battery life of the pinger.
C'était quelque chose qui nous apparaissait.
It looked like it was going to be a very difficult investigation if we couldn't recover the cockpit voice recorder.
De conversation du cockpit.
Meanwhile, investigators talk to the controller at the airport. A radar track could provide some clues about what brought the plane down.
The first evidence that we like to get when the investigation starts, of course, is a sense of the trajectory, the last departure point and the impact point. So we try to get this type of information.
But they're not going to get what they hope for.
We're a small airport here. We're not equipped with radar.
It's yet another setback.
When we discovered that we did not have any radar data, we were slightly disappointed in the sense that we knew it was going to be harder to recreate the trajectory of the aircraft.
I saw the plane climbing and then suddenly dove into the water.
Until the Ile de Ré arrives, investigators must rely on the only evidence they have: witness reports of the crash.
Il nous paraissait
We thought it was critical to gather all the eyewitness accounts to help us understand what happened.
comprendre l'événement.
Most of the witnesses were either on the beach in Moorea or on the boats fishing. All of them stated that they saw the aircraft climbing normally.
Every day, more than 500 Twin Otters navigate some of the most challenging routes on Earth, from the Australian outback to the frozen tundra of the far north. If there's a fatal flaw in the famously sturdy Twin Otter, the aviation world needs to know as soon as possible. That fact increases pressure on investigators to figure out what brought down Flight 1121.
He was climbing normally, then seems to lose control of the plane. Maybe it was their weight.
When you have a weight and balance issue, you usually have your troubles right after takeoff.
Calculating the weight of cargo, passengers, and fuel correctly is critical on small commuter planes. Getting it wrong can be deadly, as a crash in the United States demonstrated in 2003. US Airways Express Flight 5481 departs from Charlotte, North Carolina. Just 30 seconds after takeoff, the pilots lose control of their Beechcraft 1900. The commuter plane plummets to the ground, hitting an airport hangar and killing all 21 people on board. Investigators discover the plane was dangerously overloaded, more than 250 kilograms over its maximum allowable takeoff weight. The crew used incorrect estimates for passenger and baggage weight.
It's very important to know the weight of your aircraft before you take off. And therefore, we did investigate this issue very, very soon into the investigation.
19 passengers with fuel and cargo.
The BEA team checks the load and balance sheets from the Air Moorea flight and finds no issues.
We found out that everything was within the manufacturer's limits.
They should have been fine.
Whatever brought down the plane, it had nothing to do with weight. Until help arrives to search for the plane's sunken cockpit voice recorder, there is no more evidence to go on. Bouillard decides to take a chance on an unusual tactic to try to figure out what went wrong.
Oui, I need a small plane and a good pilot. Merci.
Above the island of Moorea, Alain Bouillard takes an unusual flight aboard a small commuter plane. A flight he hopes will enhance the memory of those who witnessed the crash of Flight 1121.
Okay, let's make a pass over Balagoon.
Pilots have a specific task to do at each stage of the flight. If witnesses can identify how high Santurén climbed, it might help investigators figure out what he was trying to do when he lost control of the plane. They ask witnesses to watch as Bouillard's plane climbs from the airport.
If you ask them what was the maximum altitude, they might not be able to tell you whether this was 500 feet or 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet. But if you actually show them an aircraft in the air and say, this is 500 feet, did it match what you saw? They can say more easily yes or no.
No, it's too high.
Okay, let's make one more pass, this time a little lower.
We asked the witness to tell them which one of the recreated flights match the most what they remember from the day of the accident.
Yes, that's exactly where I saw the plane.
The right height.
Excellent. We are at an altitude of almost 400 feet. Okay, let's go back.
The test flights give Bouillard a good idea of how high Michel Santurén managed to climb.
The flights we did allowed us to estimate the altitude at which the plane changed its trajectory.
Whatever went wrong, it happened when he was still climbing.
But he still doesn't know what caused the plane's sudden dive, or why the pilot couldn't recover.
When you have an airplane going nose down after takeoff, you can think of engine failure, obviously.
Dual engine failure.
A Twin Otter can fly safely with only one engine. But if both engines fail, that could cause a steep dive like the one the witnesses saw.
That was a possibility. It would match in terms of trajectory.
But having two engines fail at the exact same time is an extremely rare event.
Dual engine failure could be caused, of course, by fuel starvation, but that's quite unlikely right after takeoff. Or it can be also, let's not forget, bird ingestions in both engines, but that's quite unlikely also.
Most witnesses also report hearing engines as the plane dove towards the sea. Dual engine failure now seems even more unlikely. Sounds captured by the cockpit recorder could confirm if the engines were running. But until it's recovered, Bouillard only has the unusual flight path to go on.
This information was certainly important, but it didn't explain what happened. It seemed to us that the pilot might have had a physical breakdown, some kind of incapacitation that put the plane into a descent. These are planes that are flown by a single pilot. When a pilot is physically incapacitated, there's no one to take over control of the plane.
If the pilot had been incapacitated and then would have just, leaned over on the flight controls, indeed, it would then match the trajectory of the aircraft.
The captain's body has been recovered and sent for autopsy. The coroner has checked for any signs of a medical condition that might interfere with the captain's ability to fly. But when Bouillard reads the results,
it wasn't a heart attack.
He's back at square one.
There was nothing to suggest that he had a health problem. We have regular medical checkups. He passed without any difficulty.
We closed the door on pilot incapacitation as the cause of the accident.
Bouillard must consider every possible cause for the crash. He explores a terrifying possibility.
What about a deliberate act of sabotage?
Did someone board the flight intending to commit murder?
Intrusion into the cockpit. It's something that was plausible.
Plausible?
Bouillon knows that it's happened before. December the 7th, 1987. A disgruntled airline employee smuggles a handgun aboard Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771. In mid-flight, he shoots his former boss, then rushes towards the cockpit, where he shoots a flight attendant and both pilots. He then forces the plane into a steep dive. There's no hope for any of the 43 people aboard. The small jet slams into a California hillside and disintegrates.
I'm sorry, sir. You can't be in. What are you doing?
If someone on Air Maria Flight 1121 entered the cockpit and attacked the pilot, the sound of the struggle would be on the cockpit voice recorder.
At this stage of the investigation, it was pretty obvious that we had to find the CVR.
On August the 26th, 17 days after the accident, the French research vessel Ile de Ré finally arrives. The team knows the approximate location of the wreckage, but ocean currents may have shifted the sunken debris.
We had narrowed down the search zone to a circle of about 260 meters in diameter. We were fairly confident it was going to be in that zone, but we didn't know if it was going to be laying by itself on the seabed or if it was still in the fuselage of the aircraft.
They zero in on the recorder's locator beacon.
That's the sound we're looking for.
Technicians on the Ile de Ré launch a remotely operated underwater vehicle, or ROV, towards the sound.
We quickly located the area on the sea floor where the wreckage was dispersed.
There's our twin otter.
The remains of Air Maria Flight 1121 lie more than 650 meters below the waves.
We saw the detached wings. We saw the engines. We saw part of the cockpit.
See if you can find the tail.
The decision was quickly made to focus on the tail, where the cockpit voice recorder could be found.
Okay, let's cut it open and get the CVR out of there.
We decided to cut through the fuselage to recover the flight recorder.
It's a delicate operation. One false move and the sub could damage or destroy the crucial recorder.
Nice and easy.
We were really hoping to find it there, undamaged or just slightly damaged, and therefore increasing our chance of success for the readout process.
The salvage operation demands incredible patience.
This job of cutting out or of the ROV chewing open a hole in the plane took 5 or 6 hours of work before we could get to the cockpit voice recorder.
Finally, the team frees the CVR.
We got it. Excellent work.
We felt a great sigh of relief.
So it was a sense of satisfaction and then also worries, because if you have the recorder, that's a very good thing, but then you have to have the data in it. So the next phase to organize was shipping the recorder back to the lab at the BEA for a readout as soon as possible.
Along with the voice recorder, the salvage effort brings up other key pieces of wreckage.
We decided to recover some of the pieces that we thought would be needed, in addition to the information from the CVR.
We wanted to get the engines, We wanted to get as much cockpit panel as possible.
They quickly download the CVR data. A lone pilot hardly speaks at all. Investigators must listen for other sounds that could provide leads.
On the cockpit voice recorder, we could hear the normal takeoff roll, and then the climb phase seems to be rolling normally.
They can hear the sound of the plane as Santarén lifts off and adjusts his controls.
L'intrusion dans le cockpit était une hypothèse qui était...
An intrusion into the cockpit was still an open hypothesis. We waited for the CVR to close that door.
Fermer cette porte.
There's no sound of an intruder in the cockpit.
La première impression que nous a donné...
The first impression we got from listening to the CVR was that there was no intrusion into the cockpit. There had been no other people in the cockpit.
Then they hear the pilot cry out in surprise.
Damn it. Tout était parfaitement normal.
Everything was perfectly normal until the moment when the pilot swore.
Ce juron.
The sound recorded in the cockpit allows investigators to rule out another theory as well.
Engines sound fine?
The CVR proved they are at the maximum takeoff power all the way to impact.
Sounds like he's pulling in the flaps.
The pilot's cry of surprise comes just after he adjusts the flaps on his Twin Otter.
Again, please.
You could hear on the CVR the flap being retracted. You can also hear the pilot breathe a little bit heavier, like he was pulling on the flight controls at that time. And then immediately after that, you hear him being very surprised.
Moments later, the plane slams into the sea.
Even with a lot of experienced cockpit voice recorders are always hard to hear, especially when you know there's a tragic ending.
It's connected to the flaps. Just, I don't understand how.
Investigators learn that on flights to Tahiti, Twin Otter pilots retract their flaps when they reach about 400 feet, the same altitude where Flight 1121 began to dive. They wonder if the flaps malfunctioned. Before takeoff, pilots routinely extend their wing flaps to increase lift while they climb.
Pour les phases de croisière,
once the plane approaches cruising altitude, extended flaps increase drag, so pilots must retract them when they approach cruising altitude.
Investigators study the mechanism that operates the flaps.
We did recover the flap actuator and we were able to analyze it.
They find that it's in the correct position and shows no sign of any malfunction.
Flaps are fine.
The results of the examination showed that the flaps were retracted at impact.
After weeks of work, Bouillard still can't explain why Flight 1121 fell out of the sky.
Now, let's take a good, close look at these cables.
He focuses on the cables that operate crucial control surfaces in the tail of the plane.
nous restait la possibilité d'une défaillance.
We were left with the possibility of a mechanical breakdown or failure.
The control surfaces in the tail of a Twin Otter are activated by just 4 cables. 2 move the plane's rudder right and left, and 2 move the elevator up and down. All 4 were damaged in the crash. Bouillard looks for anything that might tell him when and how they snapped. Aviation cables are made up of multiple strands of thin wire that are twisted and then braided together for extra strength. 3 cables have unraveled, clear indication that they were ripped apart suddenly on impact.
And impact damage.
But 1 cable looks different.
Now this is interesting. This one did not snap on impact.
One cable was broken in a different manner than the three other ones. So that was something that we had to investigate.
Two cables run to the elevator on the tail. One pulls it down to pitch the nose down. The other cable pulls it up to pitch the nose up. That's the one that broke before impact. If it snapped in flight, the plane would have been thrown into a severe dive.
Damn it!
The failure of the pitch-up cable was consistent with the trajectory that was described by the eyewitnesses.
Dove into the water.
Finally, investigators understand why Michel Santurenne lost control of his twin otter. An extremely rare mechanical failure that came without warning. It's a revelation that leads to a more urgent question.
Okay, let's send these to Estelle in Paris and see what she thinks.
They must now figure out why the cable snapped before it happens to someone else. When the pitch-up cable arrives in Paris, materials specialist Estelle Boncharel examines it closely. She sees something strange. The cable shows clear evidence that different strands broke at different times and for different reasons.
The external strands were worn and those on the inside were not. They had snapped.
Distinctive damage on the outer strands suggests something has been rubbing against the cable.
It looks like 50% worn down over time.
When we looked at this cable under the microscope, we were able to see that every external strand showed these signs of wear, which added up to very substantial damage.
The pitch-up cable runs from the control column in the cockpit to the elevator, passing through a series of plastic guides. Every time the pilot pulls the nose up, the cable rubs against the guides. Planes experience the most wear and tear during takeoff and landing. It's important for mechanics to monitor the number of flights to help assess wear.
48.
Airline records provide a troubling clue.
More than 50 flights here.
Air Maurya, you were clear for...
Air Maurya planes make frequent short hops and make many more takeoffs and landings than most large airliners.
On average, it performed 50 to 70 takeoffs a day and landings too. The same plane.
Investigators need to know how all that back and forth movement could have affected the pitch-up cable. They devise a test that replicates the friction on the cable. But there's another factor that must be taken into account.
This is the only plane in the Air Maurya fleet with stainless steel cables.
Then we found out that there was a different type of control cable used for this particular aircraft.
The accident plane is a new addition to the Air Maurya fleet. The airline's other planes have control cables made of carbon steel. But Flight 1121's cables are made of stainless steel. Stainless steel withstands salt corrosion better than carbon steel.
It would make sense to make the decision to use stainless steel so that your cables would corrode less in a very saline environment. Cables could be susceptible to corrosion more than if you would operate overland.
But stainless steel cables also have a disadvantage. They wear down more quickly from friction, something Air Maurya failed to take into account when drawing up the maintenance schedule for the Twin Otter that crashed.
A stainless steel cable contains chrome, which makes it better at resisting corrosion. It also contains nickel, which can make it more sensitive to wear.
Lab results confirmed that the frequent short flights helped wear away the outside of the stainless steel cable.
The stainless steel is worn, just like on Air Maurya.
The wear was the result of rubbing against parts of the plane.
It could be a crucial discovery, one that finally explains why a critical control cable broke in flight. Investigators suspect friction weakened the cable so much that it snapped as Santoren was pulling his elevator up to climb.
At first we thought that the cable broke because of the wear. That was our first impression, because the wear was significant.
Boncharel puts the theory to the test. She recreates the force used by Santoren to pull up the nose of the plane. If she's right, the worn cable should snap. But it doesn't break.
Once we performed this test, we saw that with 50% wear, you still needed much more force. A force 10 times stronger than what you'd find in flight during this phase of flap retraction.
Thanks to the tests, we realized that even a cable worn down by 50% could have withstood the stress of the entire flight.
Cable remained intact.
We had to figure out what phenomenon could have weakened the cable.
Something else helped to snap that cable. What?
Investigators know that planes sometimes sustain hard-to-detect damage from small impacts with ground vehicles. If an airport vehicle accidentally ran into the plane's elevator, the impact may have broken more wires in the already worn pitch-up cable. Bouillard checks the records at both airports on the Twin Otters route, Moorea and the larger airport in Tahiti where it parks overnight.
Thank you.
He needs to know if the plane was ever involved in an accident.
Nothing. No impact reported.
We didn't find any evidence of impact on the control surfaces, which eliminated the possibility of contact with another vehicle during overnight parking.
It's another dead end. There seems to be no way to explain why a cable would snap in flight. Until Bouillard notices something on the taxiway at the busy Tahiti airport.
Tell me, how close do those jets get to the Air Moorea planes?
We targeted the phenomenon of the exhaust from a jet engine, a phenomenon called jet blast.
Jet blast is the powerful exhaust expelled from jet engines. The hurricane-force winds can reach speeds over 160 kilometers per hour.
A plane at full power, a plane like an Airbus or like a Boeing, whose power can flip a plane a few dozen feet behind it. It's a phenomenal force.
Phénoménal.
Investigators study the layout of Tahiti's airport. They need to know if the Air Moorea planes could have been damaged by jet blast.
Okay. The Air Moorea Twin Otters are parked here.
They learn that Air Moorea parks its planes very close to a taxiway used by powerful jets. Airports routinely set up jet blast barriers to protect planes from the dangerous force. There should be barriers to protect the Twin Otters at Tahiti's airport, but they've been removed.
Now look at this.
It's an important discovery.
The jets, they back out here.
These barriers were removed to make it easier to go from one parking lot to another. There was no longer this physical barrier to protect the Twin Otter planes.
The Airbus or Boeing jets were found, let's say, about 50 meters away from Air Moorea's parking. Very close.
The Air Moorea planes are parked right in the path of the jet blast.
This plane had been parked in an area that was prone to receiving blasts from the large carriers during their departure. We therefore arrived at this hypothesis, that there was a very high probability that the cable was weakened by jet blast.
Alain Bouillard learns that Air Mauria's planes are especially vulnerable to jet blast because of an airline policy designed to prevent accidents. The Twin Otters are parked with the elevators locked in a nose-down position. It makes it impossible to get off the ground with the elevators locked.
It was locked by a device that stopped the cables from moving and prevented the elevator from moving.
But the nose-down position likely increased the damaging effects of the jet blast. Investigators suspect that, like a sail in the wind, the tilted elevators caught the full force of the blast, putting extra strain on the locked pitch-up cable.
If the controls are locked, it pulls and transfers this energy directly to the cable.
They now wonder if the force of the jet blast is enough to break a worn cable even further. Another cable test provides the answer.
There was a cable worn down by 50%, a cable that was still able to resist a hefty amount of strain, and then a jet blast phenomenon left the cable so fragile that it only had 1 or 2 strands left intact.
Rather than tearing the cable completely apart, the jet blast left a few strands of wire, just enough for Flight 1121 to take off, but not enough to survive the rigors of a 7-minute flight.
They were hanging by a thread.
If the jet blast had severed the cable completely, Captain Santarén would not have been able to get his plane off the ground. But once airborne, Captain Santarén and his 19 passengers are one thin strand of wire away from disaster. Investigators reproduce the forces created as the pilot adjusts his controls. Captain Santarén reaches 400 feet and retracts his flaps, causing his Twin Otter to pitch down slightly. He adjusts his elevator to pitch back up. It's enough to snap the final strand of the worn and damaged cable.
He didn't have a chance.
We determined that the force needed to correct the pitch of the plane was strong enough to break the last strand.
There was nothing the pilot could do to save his plane and his 19 passengers.
You can imagine his reaction. What's going on? The cable broke. The control column came back, and by the time you analyze what happened, the plane drops very quickly, and a few seconds later, you've hit the Earth.
The Air Mauria accident killed 20 people and forever changed the lives of the victims' families. Bouillard and his team leave French Polynesia, determined to make it safer to fly on Twin Otters.
The first recommendation was an urgent request to check the cables on all planes equipped with stainless steel cables.
Today, there are tougher maintenance and inspection standards around the world for stainless steel control cables.
The main lesson from this investigation, yes, is the risk of jet blast at airports.
The Air Mauria disaster raised awareness throughout the industry of the vital safety role played by jet blast barriers, especially at airports that handle both large jets and small commuter planes. Eric Lemar hopes it will be enough to stop such an accident from happening again.
I dare to hope. If not, what purpose did this accident serve? To have 19 passengers die and have the same thing happen again without learning anything? It would be a shame.
C'est dommage. Meet passionate people and their unusual collections in a brand new Clash of the Collectors double bill. There can be only one winner. The judging starts tomorrow at 9.